Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be shedding light on the downsides appertaining to living the nomadic life. So what are they, you may ask? Without further ado, without further delay, allow me to demystify that answer to that inquiry right here, right now. Lamentably, much to my dismay, much to my consternation, much to my chagrin, much to my agony, much to my grief, and much to my distress, living the nomadic life is fraught with drawbacks. It is fraught with issues, to say the least, which is problematic. Your plight may exacerbate if you live the nomadic life. If you live the nomadic life, you have relatively few possessions. That will yield you a lower cost of living. That will reduce your recurring costs, since being able to retain possessions is expensive. However, it also means that you have less products on hand to access. You do not have the luxuries associated with having a permanent residence. When you have a home, it is typically deluged, it is typically inundated with your favorite possessions. When you have a spacious, capacious home, you have access to amenities on hand. However, as a nomad, the possessions that you have access to are typically relegated to your vehicle or relegated to your backpack. And while you may cherish these possessions, you're limited to which possessions you can haul with you, to which possessions you can retain if you're unwilling to finance the lease on a storage unit or unwilling to finance mortgage payments on a home or unwilling to rent an apartment, house, or some other type of domicile. So, while there is an upside appertaining to having few possessions, which culminates in having lower costs, the downside is you have access to far fewer luxuries and far fewer amenities as a result of having less possessions. Having less possessions is one of the primary tenets of living the nomadic life. When you live the nomadic life, you are not overwhelmed. You are not burdened with the albatross of having to retain a copious amount of possessions. So, in other words, one profound downside of living the nomadic life is that you do not have all the luxuries, all the amenities, as you otherwise would if you had a permanent domicile and had a spacious, capacious home. What is another downside appertaining to living the nomadic life? Well, when you live the nomadic life, it is all the more arduous to establish relationships. You are pivoting from environment to environment. You may live out of your vehicle. You may live in an RV. You may live in a minivan. You may pivot from hostel to hostel, from couch to couch. And if you want to be able to form long-lasting relationships with other people, if you want to be able to obtain more friendships and build a robust network and be able to confabulate with people far more frequently in person, living a nomadic life may not be conducive to doing that because your environment is constantly changing. Your life is incessantly in flux. And not everyone is willing to chat for a prolonged period of time over the phone. People prefer to converse, they prefer to confabulate, they prefer to confer with one another in person in lieu of speaking over a smartphone or a web camera. So, What severs relationships is time. When you're pivoting from new environment to new environment, it's much more arduous, it's much more cumbersome to maintain robust relationships with other people. They become all the more tenuous and they tend to sever and essentially fizzle out of existence because you're not calmly interacting with these people if they are reticent, if they are recalcitrant, if they are reluctant to converse with you over the phone. On the other hand, when you have a stable environment, when you reside in your domicile for decades on end, it's much easier to sustain having meaningful relationships with other people because you're within close vicinity to them. Whereas if you're pivoting from environment to environment, they're going to be a far distance from you. And just like time severs relationships, a vast distance between two people can unfortunately sever a relationship or can render it all the more tenuous. People prefer to interact in person in lieu of interacting over the phone. What is another downside appertaining to living the nomadic life? Your employment status may be all the more precarious. Typically, as a nomad, you're pivoting from job to job. If you're doing that, you're less apt to be promoted by an employer. Furthermore, when you live your life as a nomad, you're less apt to pursue a full-time job and commit to working for an employer for 80 plus hours a week. You're typically pursuing seasonal jobs as a nomad. And when you're pivoting from job to job, a precarious employment situation becomes all the more precarious. If you're pivoting from job to job, it's not conducive to being able to attain a higher paying position at your current job. And it can also be very time-consuming, very debilitating, very distressful, as well as eminently agonizing and harrowing to have to constantly apply to new jobs so that you can have work in whichever new environments you're preordained to reside in the imminent future. So in other words, to recapitulate, succinctly stated, when you're pivoting from job to job, you're not only apt to receive a lower paying seasonal job than you otherwise would if you worked a full-time job consistently for one employer, but you also have to deal with the onerous burden, the albatross, the Brobdingnagian undertaking of constantly finding new jobs that are within the vicinities of whichever new environments you plan on moving to in the pending future for a temporary period of time. And that constant job search process can definitely be highly time draining and drain your mental bandwidth and divert your attention away from truly being able to embrace living the nomadic life, because even attaining seasonal work is not easy, and it's a highly time-consuming process to even secure interview requests for temporary, fleeting, non-permanent jobs. So, it is strenuous, it is debilitating, it is highly time-draining, and it is undesirable to constantly have to apply for all these new jobs, because the process is just so long-winded and so time-consuming, and is truly a pain in the shell. Another downside appertaining to living the nomadic life is that a vehicular issue can be a major setback. If you do not live the nomadic life and you have a home, if your vehicle needs to be repaired, it gets towed to a dealership and you still have a place to reside. But if you live out of your vehicle, such as a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, you may have to stay at a hostel. You may have to find a capsule hotel. And you have nowhere to put your possessions in the interim, as your vehicle is deemed unusable. You really have to find other living accommodations. If your vehicle breaks down and you live out of your vehicle as a nomad. On the other hand, if you live a traditional life out of a home or out of an apartment, if your vehicle breaks down, you're not without access to an environment to sleep in. However, as a nomad, if your vehicle breaks down, if it's in a state of distress, if it's in dire need of vehicular repairs, you not only have to find somewhere else to live in the interim as your vehicle is getting repaired, but you have nowhere else to place your possessions that you store inside your vehicle as it is being repaired. So, in other words, a vehicular issue can be a major setback in the nomad's life, whereas a vehicular issue is less of a setback in a regular individual's life. So, embracing the nomadic life is not easy. It's not easy to constantly find new jobs. It's not easy to have access to so few possessions at a time and learn to adapt to living the nomadic lifestyle. It's not easy to maintain long-lasting relationships if you live the nomadic life. And it's not easy to not be profoundly disrupted as a nomad if your vehicle breaks down and is deemed unusable. You never want your vehicle to be deemed inoperable. You need to have a functioning vehicle as a nomad. Most nomads prefer to live out of their vehicles rather than couch surf, or at least have access to a vehicle in hand, rather than keep everything stored in their backpacks. So, there are upsides and downsides with living the nomadic life, and the downsides for most people deter them from ever entertaining the notion, ever taking heed of the notion of embracing living the nomadic life. However, if you deem the upsides to preponderantly outweigh the downsides of living the nomadic life, then you can dabble into living the nomadic life. In order to live the nomadic life, you must not be maladaptive. You must be adaptive and amenable to implementing profound changes in your life. As a nomad, you have more free time, a lower cost of living, but it does come at a cost. You may be living a more precarious, unstable life that is more in flux, that is all the more unpredictable, and that is all the more prone to change at any given moment, especially as you pivot from job to job and you pivot from environment to environment. Your life is just constantly changing and is not immutable and is not monotonous and is not repetitious if you are a nomad. Nomads need to be dauntless. They need to be fearless. They need to be brazen and bold and audacious. They need to have the temerity to embrace profound changes being ushered in to their lives. If not, then the nomadic life will not bode well for the prospective nomad. I hope that you found this video to be insightful, captivating, and enthralling. Most people desist, abstain, and refrain from becoming nomads, but that does not mean that you have to do so. You're a pioneer of your own destiny, and you can choose how to live your life. Living the nomadic life is not for everyone. However, it is for some people. Once again, I hope that you deem this video to be informative and insightful. Have a blissful day. Goodbye.